Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Blue Abroad YouTube channel with another episode of The Rest. I'm your host, Aris Namatakos, and I'm joined by a slightly internet dodgy Nathan, who's having some issues, but it's all right, we'll get through it. Nathan, mate, how you going?
Yeah, not too bad. Just a disclaimer for anyone: if I look like I'm not listening to Ari, it's because I am. But nah, in
Yeah,
all seriousness,
yeah.
Ari might cut out for a bit, and I might not be able to hear something. But fingers crossed. Let's hope for the best.
We'll battle through. We'll battle through. So let's just get things underway with a story that has been in the pipeline for about 4 years, and it finally reared its ugly head once again, and it happened. I think it happened on Tuesday, so the day after we recorded last week's episode, which we couldn't speak about it. But it's slightly old news, but I feel like it's important enough for us to speak about it. It is, of course, the revelations that have come out in regards to the Adelaide Crows 2018 preseason camp. Of course, it came out through Eddie Betts, who released a book and did a tell-all in his book. Were you as surprised as me as to seeing this be brought up again 4 years later, or was it a matter of time until the actual truth came out?
No, I think it was a matter of time, but it's. I didn't like. I think we all expected that it was like worse than what players made it out to be, but I wasn't expecting this bad at the same time. I mean, we'll get into this, but I'm surprised this had to get through X amount of people.
In the camp itself, or like the actual of it coming out?
Of well,
Both, really.
wait, say what you said. Say what you said at the start.
So are you surprised that it's had to go through so many different people for it to come out, as in like what actually happened, or the actual camp itself?
The actual camp itself. I mean,
Right. Okay.
this these processes. What I mean, you wouldn't call them activities that they did on the camp. They don't sound like activities. At least
Yeah. Yeah.
these things they did. These
Yeah.
went through people and professionals, and I to leave that much of a mental impact or what isn't as down the track, it's pretty concerning. And I wouldn't want to be still working at that club right now. I don't think you are fit to work in a club that has had those standards in the past.
Yeah. Well, the only administration slash staff member, I do believe, that was involved in that camp to an extent that's still there is Mark Rashudo, who is doing football manager, I think. And he's very defiant in his role, and he's being very resolute in the fact that he won't resign or won't step down. Now, the actual not allegations, because I feel like it's as close to as concrete proof as you could have. Betts obviously came out and said there was various different, I think, maybe not activities, but there was various different just things that happened. Of course, we all know the thing about the man being called Richmond and dressed in all Richmond gear and the fake guns and all this. Is this? We've seen sagas in the past. I mean, the mind immediately goes back to Essendon, right? Is this even more of a just borderline stupid thing to have happened? Because I'm not rationalizing Essendon and what they did, right? Or what they've at least been alleged to do in 2012. But what the premise of that was, at least to 99% of people's mind, was to try and improve recovery. Whereas this, in my mind, because everyone knew what was happening, because it was happening to them and they were fully aware of what was happening, how could this have ever turned out to be a positive from the things that we've come to learn?
I mean, clearly they're going off the whole thing of you need a hurt from whatever's happened in the past in order to move forward and become better. But they took hurt from the past way too personal just beyond football, which is way too far. It's okay for clubs to get to know each other personally, but not in that way, not in that sense where you are mentally damaging individuals' mental health. That is completely beyond football and everything related to that, which is just, I think this is worse than what the Essendon saga was. And look, we were both young, and I don't think I can remember the details, but still, I think at least with Essendon, it was pretty clear cut, the intention, whereas I don't know what the intention of this Adelaide camp was, and even why the AFL have waited till now to come out and apologise about this.
Yeah, it is the keep it hush hush type thing, and obviously this has been in the brewing for a while, and we all thought it came to a head when that report came out. Sam McClure and Caroline Wilson, I believe, for The Age, made that report. We all thought, bang, came to a head here, and that's kind of the last we've heard of it. Of course, it was dismissed at the start of 2018 by Don Pike and by Mark Rashido and others. Then the report came out, and then there was some legality issues. Obviously, now we've come to find that everything in that article, from what I believe, was fact, right? Or allegedly fact anyway. So it's kind of a not karma situation, because I mean it is a form of karma where you try and hide something and you try and keep something on the hush when there was however many list players, however many people actually present on the camp. It was going to come out eventually, and I am maybe not proud, but I am happy in the manner in which it has come out in my opinion. I feel like it has come out by a person whose intention, like in bets, whose intention isn't to destroy the Adelaide Football Club. His intention is to make is to make the issue known and to learn from, because like Eddie Betts is, I mean, the more Eddie Betts is in the world, the better, right? His intention is for people to understand what's happened and to learn from it, and to learn about the vilification about using the talking stick, which wasn't given permission to use by Aboriginal elders or Indigenous elders. Stuff like this, to learn from it and understand why this is not right. I mean, there was a lot of players, Betts included, who were against the camp in the first place. There were people who thought, this will just be your normal pre-season camp. They'll put us through sleep deprivation, like starvation, physical, not torture, but like strenuous physical activities, nothing we haven't done before, etc. But by all accounts and by all we've come to know, is that this was completely different and beyond even the realms of this could work. This, in my opinion, from start to finish, even in the development of this, was never going to work. I don't understand it at all.
I don't think a lot of us do. I mean, sadly, I don't think what Betts and then what Josh Jenkins said on SEN, I don't think that. I mean, that's just two players out of however many were on that camp. So yeah, very, very interesting that it just ever happened. It's like I said, how that goes through X amount of people, gets ticked off and said this is the right way for our football club to get better. And look, it's not, and especially if we go back to that time, it's not like they had been, top four for the last 5 years and like they kept failing. They finished. Yeah, I mean they finished 7th in 2016. They made a semi, they lost, and then the next year they made a grand final with a team that was still probably had 2 or 3 more years to contend, and they lost that the next year, and they didn't even make finals, and they haven't since then.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's not a. They weren't a side that were like had failed time and time again and needed like a mental reset. They were on the up. They lost the game of football. Like That's I can guarantee you, if Adelaide win that grand final, this camp does not happen. Or put it this way, if Adelaide lose in the prelim, this camp doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's because they came in heavy favourites. They thought they were going to go to the G, roll over the underdog Tigers, and come home with another premiership. Like, yes, that's obviously something mentally not mentally wrong, but there is a mental blockage there in terms of being able to overcome that thing. But it wasn't this extreme. And people do laugh at like the power stance, for example, but it worked for two finals. It worked. Go back and watch it when they did it against the Giants. They were rocked. The Giants from that were mentally, you could see it. They didn't know what to do. They were completely shattered from that moment, and it worked. They killed them. They killed Geelong in the prelim as well, I believe. And people laugh at that because they lost the grand final. If they win the grand final, we're going to look at this and think it was a stroke of genius, guaranteed. So it's like all this has come about because of one football game, and one football game that they lost against a team that won 2 of the next 3 flags after it, and one of the better sides in the modern era. It's not like they lost to like a pub team. This has just the fact that it even happened in the first place, like we're saying, is beyond even comprehension. And I think probably maybe one of the last points is, do you have, or maybe not do you have, but do you think the leaders of the football club at the time, because I feel like this is a point that hasn't really been raised, in depthly anyway, do you think the leaders at the time should have stepped up during the camp? Because there was red flags from minute one when they were blindfolded in the bus. Do you think someone should have stepped up?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because obviously you're in the moment, and I mean the leaders at that club were probably. I mean, I can't remember at that time who they were, but they would have been there for a couple of years before. You trust the people who are in that football club, that organisation, who run that system, those programs. You have a lot of trust and faith in those people, and like Jenkins said about how he told, I can't remember who, but he said don't bring this up. I don't want this brought up. He had trust in these people, and I'm sure these leaders did too. And look, I'm sure it would have thrown him off guard, but I think in hindsight, it's easy to say they should have stepped up, but I don't think at that current time they would have really believed in themselves to step up and say, look, this isn't right. They would have gone with the flow and just accepted what was told, what the processes were for them and what that camp involved. But yeah, it would have been a tough situation whether you were a leader or not. I think it would have been a lot of confusion, and I assume it would have been pretty disheartening as well, just to have experienced that and say, look, they probably would have doubted their leadership after that as well and not had that confidence or courage to come out.
No doubt, yeah. And I mean, things have come out like they were instructed to say that they were better fathers, leaders, and children, or whatever, after it. And then there's a quote of Rory Sloane saying that heading into the preseason in response to the camp. Like, there's obviously Josh Jenkins spoke very eloquently on SEN about this, and I mean, yeah, the leaders at the time you'd think would have been like your Rory Sloanes, your Tex Walkers, these type of characters who were still developing leaders themselves. Like you said, it was a developing list that had made its first grand final, that had made its first prelim since 2012, that had really been, I mean, that 2012 team would have been very different to the team that made it in 2017. So it was still a young team, and it was still a team that had a lot of potential. I think we can go as far as say this camp destroyed a very promising team. Because if it doesn't happen, in my opinion, the quality's there. No doubt the quality's there. I mean, that forward line that year was dynamic as all hell. And they were playing good football and probably should have won the grand final. Yeah. But you do this, and hindsight's a beautiful thing, but I feel like if this camp wasn't to take place, we could have seen an Adelaide dynasty.
Crazy to think so many different things could. Look, football could have gone completely different, but this is where we are right now with Richmond winning 3 and 5, and Adelaide are basically a shell of what they used to be. But look, it's better they move on and create something new than live in the past. It's for those people who experience that to, like you said with Betts, to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think the Crows are moving forward. And last question: does Rashudo stay, or does
No,
he
he
put
can't.
his hand up?
He can't. Whether he gets sacked or stands down, I don't think his job's tenable. You can't be associated with that. Just like I assume after the saga in 2012 and 2013, Essendon shoved every single person involved with that out the door, whether they were by fault or whether they weren't. Get them out. You can't have it. And I would even go as far as to say they need to get every player. I know it's hard because you can't just get rid of your whole premiership team, but I don't think Adelaide will be the same until every player's from that list, or maybe at least every player that suffered the biggest of the extremes from that camp is, well, at least 90% of them are out the door. Because by all
Yeah.
accounts, it wasn't every single player subjected to what like the big stories have been. But for those who were, I feel like the more of them that aren't at the club anymore, the better. And for me, Rashido's job's untenable. I assume your opinion's the same.
Yeah, spot on. Same as you. I just don't see how he can. Don't know how he can walk into that club with pride.
Yeah,
Simple as
and yeah, it's a perfect way to sum it all up. Now let's go. Let's finish on that, and just I feel like this isn't going to be the last of it because I feel like once one player speaks up, it's going to start a snowball. But hopefully, this maybe block of people coming out about it is the last we ever hear of it. Because I feel like for Adelaide's sake and for the AFL's sake, we need to address it now, squash it, make sure it doesn't happen again, and address it, and then move on. Because that's the best for the Crows and the best for the competition. So let's move on. And let's go to the incident over the weekend that actually does involve a Carlton player, but too big of an incident not to speak about. It is, of course, the man above me, Mr. Patrick Cripps, being suspended for 2 weeks for his bump on Callum Archie. It was in a time of the game where Carlton needed someone to stand up, either physically or on the scoreboard, and Cripps, I assume, put it on his shoulders to make a stand physically. It unfortunately ended in Archie being concussed or being deemed to have been concussed by concussion protocol and then subsequently subbed off. He's facing a 2 week suspension, which we're almost certain Carlton have to challenge. What are your thoughts on this? Because I actually don't know, surprisingly. I thought we would have spoken about this, but let me know. What are your thoughts?
look, at the time of it happening, I was straight away. I was like, "Yeah, you're gone 2 weeks."
Done.
And I mean, that was the angle we got live made it look like he just fully went and elbowed him, which obviously wasn't the case. It's a hard one because, and there was another angle I saw today where you can see Cripps actually has his eyes for the ball at his height because, there was a pretty significant height difference. I do understand the 2 weeks, and as much, as I'm not happy about it, just, bias wise, I'm glad the AFL are consistent with the whole concussion rule thing. And look, I don't think it warrants 2 weeks purely because his intention was not to lead to that concussion or anything like that. I think a week would be suitable. I still think, like, if you are leading to a player having to leave the field with concussion, and that concussion is such a serious thing for these footballers now, and the long-term effects it can have, I think players should get punished for it regardless of the intent or not, because look, if you're leaving a player like that, it's no good for the game, no good for the player. But I don't think his intent was to do that. So that's why the 2 weeks, I understand it falls into all the categories and criteria, but it's hard. You can't, the AFL doesn't base these off common sense or, just don't think 360. It's just whatever criteria Cripps meets, and in that case, he meets 2 weeks, and those were my initial thoughts. Your thoughts?
Yeah, same. I thought as soon as he did it, I thought, yeah, he's done. season done, assuming Carlton don't make finals. But I thought 2 weeks straight away. I said it to my dad straight away. 2 weeks, he's done. Looking at it from another angle, I thought, all right, that helps his case. I don't necessarily think that angle will get him off, but I thought it will case. And I mean, it's graded careless over intentional, which I think is fair. It's graded high contact, which of course was going to happen, and graded medium impact. Oh no, high impact. Sorry, which does via the criteria 4 to 2 weeks. Yeah, I fully agree with what you said there. He needs to be stamped. He needs to be suspended, in my opinion, in terms of the head trauma now, especially coming with a lot of what Joe Schultz has come out and said what he's suffering, and other players. I mean, obviously we know Daniel Venables retired from it. I know it's not. I mean, it's obviously not as serious as the Daniel Venables case itself, but I can't remember. I mean, I was very young when Joe Schultz was running around, but I can't remember one incident where he got where he had like one incident where he got hit to the head. I'm assuming there was, and I just can't remember. But it is the build up of head knocks over the years that do the most damage and can really be almost a silent, just break your brain down. Like that's what they do. So I agree. He definitely needs to be reprimanded. I don't think. I think if it was a marking contest, there'd be a lot more grounds for him to get off because of the way his action was. So, okay, put it this way: if Cripps just runs straight into Calamache going for the ball, I think he's fine. It's the jump that does it for me because you're leaving the ground. Automatically there's more force behind it if you jump, right? That's just how momentum works. And I just feel that in my mind went too straight away. I saw the other angle and I've watched it a couple of times and I saw Archie afterwards. Like, yes, he got subbed off and yes, he did look groggy, but he wasn't like down pressed here. What happened with Tom Stewart? Put it that way. He wasn't out cold. He was quite clearly not fully there, but it's not like he was out cold, like unconscious for a sustained period of time. So I think that helps his case to an extent. I just think, 2 weeks, if Carlton are able to challenge it, or obviously they'll challenge it, but if they're able to get it down to 1 and grade it medium impact, that's what I feel like is the probable course of action.
Well, look, he's got to learn from it. So that's the only thing he can do, and your fingers crossed it doesn't happen again. But yeah, look, I'd be surprised if it gets. I mean, it's not going to get, thrown away. There'll be some amount of weeks he'll get. I think it's the case of if it goes down to 1 week, and I'm sure that's probably what they'll try and argue. But yeah, look, I'm glad they're consistent because that's something this league seems to really struggle with in a lot of areas, consistency. But you got to stay consistent with these concussion rules. And unfortunately, Cripps is on the wrong end of it. So just got to, learn from it and choose your opponents wisely if you're doing those type of things.
Yeah, I mean, yes, Calamachi. I mean, this obviously is not excusing it by any means, or we're not justifying it. But if it's someone like an Oscar McInerney standing underneath that ball, it's probably a different story. It just happens to be what it was. It is what it is, and it is almost a situation of, well, if he does get like you said, there's almost no chance he gets thrown out, and it was in a moment of time where it was almost a crossroads type thing, and I feel like this tribunal hearing is almost a crossroads because if they're able to get it down to 1, he returns for round 23. Carlton could and probably will have all to play for against Collingwood, and Carlton want Patrick Cripps playing in that game. If he gets 2 weeks, they're going to have to verse Melbourne, who have one of the most dynamic midfields in the comp when up and running, and a Collingwood side that just win somehow every single game. And if you're going to topple them, you need your best players playing. This tribunal call could almost make or break Carlton's season, and it's a shame. And it's a shame that a player who's had a pretty good record with the tribunal. That's what I was going to say before. The sentencing, the mitigating factor is that this is the first time he's ever been suspended, first time he's ever been cited, I do believe. So of course, the record, there's a mitigating factor there just off straight away. So I mean, from a Carlton perspective, if he gets off completely, I'll be shocked. I'll be so shocked if it gets thrown out. If he gets 2 weeks, and if Carlton's appeal isn't successful and Cripps gets 2 weeks, I almost we have to accept it, of course, but it's almost like, yeah, fair enough. If he gets 1, I think that's probably the best case scenario, like in a realistic realm. So it will be interesting to see. Of course, this will come out after. So if this will come out Wednesday night or Thursday morning, the Cripps will have his fate decided. But Carlton will have their finals chances hinging on a court date, in a sense, which, considering how well they started the season, is actually quite funny. So it will be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, look, well, for Cripps, it's just fingers crossed that something good happens in that tribunal. And look, if it's 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks, but so much you can do. It unfortunately just was the wrong situation for him, and he tried to do the right thing for the team, I think, but you've just got to protect the player that's getting hurt, and unfortunately that was Archie, and you just got to live and learn with that.
Yeah, he will learn. He will grow from this regardless, and it will be say he does miss 2 weeks, and say can't lose their final 2 games of the season and miss out on the finals. He will have to learn from that, because no doubt he will feel some burden for responsibility, but he'll learn. He's a leader now. He's an old enough boy to learn from his mistakes. So let's go from that to an actual football. Let's speak about the game itself for once. Let's speak about a team that is by far, in a way, my in my mind, premiership favourites, and that's Geelong. Now, I want to speak about their home ground advantage, because is that now? I mean, we've heard for ages. It was playing West Coast over there, or even like playing Brisbane up there in like the early 2000s. Then it was West Coast at Subi. Then it was Richmond at the G. Is Geelong at GMHBA the hardest test in footy now? Because I feel like they have a stranglehold over that ground like no other team with no other ground in the country.
I can't even remember the last team who actually beat them there in recent time. Look, it's just such a weird ground. I a soccer pitch purely because one side is the straightest line you'll ever see. I mean, it is genuinely probably the best home ground advantage, along with Brisbane at the Gabba, because I just don't see how any team can even replicate through the week training on that type of pitch. You just don't have a long enough time to do it. Geelong get it 7 days a week, 365 days per year. So they really are unbeatable there. I just don't think anyone can play a game style that is going to beat theirs on their own home deck. So that's, look, probably a shame they don't play finals there, and I would bolster them as a premiership favourite if they played finals there. But finals football at the MCG, it's a different game style, and they have proven better than in recent years they can hold up at the MCG and play a better game style compared to what they were doing last year there. They just seemed out of their depths of that ground, but this year they seem better. They've competed well. Yeah, tough team, Geelong. Real tough team.
Yeah, and I was actually going to bring that up. So is it a hindrance, in a sense, despite obviously their brilliance and despite it almost being a guaranteed win? every time they go there. Is it a hindrance because they don't get that finals? Well, I mean, unless they verse maybe a Fremantle. Fremantle's probably the only side in the 8 where you could justify a home final at GMHBA, because every other team has solid Melbourne presence. Of course, Sydney with the South Melbourne link and Brisbane with the Fitzroy link. So, is it almost a hindrance, the fact that they can't? They very rarely play finals down there, and they don't really have that MCG experience that the likes of Collingwood, Richmond, even Carlton have.
Well, you could say that, but I mean that's the thing. They've beaten all those teams at that ground this year. Wait, Collingwood, did they? Yeah, they beat Collingwood. They came back and beat Collingwood. Collingwood was the only team who really put them to the sword at that ground. But they've actually proven they can beat in the MCG teams this year, which they couldn't do in previous years. And, I think the best example last year, in terms of those big grounds, was when they played Melbourne twice. They played them in round 4, and Melbourne just dominated them, exposed them through the outsides on the wings, which they're not used to because of the narrow ground, but they have been able to fix that and change that game style. And it looks impressive. It looks like they'll be able to actually do some damage, I think, more than previous years. They have learnt to overcome that struggle of going from narrow to wide. So it'll be interesting. They've actually, probably for the first time in a while, put themselves up for the challenge and proven they can contend with the MCG teams.
Yeah, and I think further to your point, they played Melbourne early on last year, got done. They versed them in the final round at GMHBA, and despite them losing the game, they were 40 points up or whatever it was and lost after the siren. And then they go over to Optus, a wide ground, and get absolutely killed. So there's just further proof of that. Now, we spoke about their ground. We all know the history that Geelong have in finals, especially under Chris Scott. Is it? I mean, I was of the opinion that last year was their final chance. I thought it was too old of a list, aging, not good enough, not clutch enough in the big moments. Could they? It's almost as if they're defying odds, because I feel like every year, every preseason, we come in and say, "Yeah, Geelong are too old, too slow. They're done. Rebuild." But they just find a way. Is it almost a maybe not upset premiership win because the quality is there in abundance, but it has, in my opinion, it's come from a place no one really thought, in my opinion, this season that they're putting together.
I feel like with a lot of those players coming to the end of their careers, this would sort of be their fairy tale finish in a sense. And I'm sure they probably would have used as a lot of motivation through the preseason, but I think they also thrive off, people and media's doubt of them. They've done that probably for the last 2 or 3 years, where people count them out early and they always seem to prove everyone wrong somehow. So, look, it seems fitting considering how many things are coming to the end for that club, you'd assume, in terms of play wise.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a good swan song. Shame they couldn't do it in 2020 for Ablett, but it will be interesting to see. They're getting um that that MCG form going, and there's a real chance that they do versus Fremantle in the first qualifying final, which in my opinion you could play that at GMHBA. So yeah, I know the stand's currently knocked down, so maybe they won't, but it'll be interesting to see if they're going to play any final there. It'll be that one. So it'll be interesting to see how, if the Cats can break that duck and that monkey off the back that they just like shake the monkey off the back that they just have, and then overcome all odds and win a grand final 11 years on from 2011. So let's go from the top, which we've spoken about for what seems forever. Let's go to the bottom. Let's give the bottom teams some love and some attention and some hopefulness going forward. Now, let's take the bottom 4 clubs at the moment, which is West Coast, North Melbourne, Adelaide, and the Giants. Who out of those teams have the brighter future?
Look, you posed the question earlier when I read this earlier today, and I stared at it for quite a while and had absolutely no idea. It was a very hard thing to think about. I mean, for me, like I always thought at the start of the year, I was like, GWS will be contending for a premiership. They have the list to do it. There should like no doubt they'll be up there, and they've completely fallen away, and it seems like they've gone completely backwards. I think for GWS, like I think they'll always have a bright future for unsaid reasons, but I think we all know the AFL will make sure they always have a bright future. So it's hard to they'd be up there. West Coast, I think I came to the conclusion will have the brightest future, and I think it's just because a team, of that reputation, you can't see them sitting at the bottom for too long. I mean, I guess you could have said that about our club for the last 20 years with the reputation we have. But I think considering there's only 2 teams in the West, and they're the more heavily followed team, I don't see them sitting down the bottom for too long. And this hasn't been the season they wanted it to be. They've got some good youth that are coming through that haven't played a lot this year with injuries. They, number 1 pick in the mid-season draft, which realistically, if they hadn't had these injuries and the poor start, they would have never got. So they've probably got a very good player. Just, I wouldn't say by luck, because it's not lucky that they've had all these injuries, but they wouldn't have expected to get someone like Jai Cully halfway through the season. But then we look at North and Adelaide, and North, it's very hard. North, I think we can compare to Carlton 2018, and you just look at the list and think there is actually no future. Or you can look at a couple players and say there's a future, but we could never ever say with confidence there's a bright future. You could just hope there was. So North, it's very hard. But I think we've seen glimpses in the last couple of rounds that they're at least building on something compared to the first 15 rounds where they didn't even look like they were building on anything. Adelaide is probably the toughest one in the group. I'm not too sure as of yet. I think I still need to see another year of how they develop, because they seem like they're slowly building, and their trend has been to start a season really strong and then they fall off for the back end, or really just the last, after round 5, they tend to just fall off. So Adelaide seem like they're building up a good culture again. It's whether these players really develop and bring them success in the next coming, probably, year or 2.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the bottom 4, it is quite uninspiring in a sense. I feel like the Giants, while it's not maybe the biggest future, I feel like they will have the biggest jump next season, just purely out of the quality they have. It's quite ridiculous, some of the players. I know the likes of Taranto and Jacob Hopper are linked away from the club, but they still have your Whitfields, Toby Greens, Tom Greens, Lockie Ash, Josh Kelly, Sam Canelio, Jesse Hogan, Phil Davis, Sam Taylor, like Jets, right? Like really, really good players. They probably have the best list out of the bottom 4 at the moment. I would agree with you and say the West Coast, I just don't see them sitting at the bottom for too long. I just can't see it happening. And I feel like they're just maybe not smart organisation, but they're an organisation that understands what they need to do to do a solid rebuild. North, I mean, North's a tricky one because they've got some really exciting players. I've seen Zerha and Larky kick some bags this season with obviously Davis Uniacke, Jai Simpkin. These guys are building. That you can see that there's something there. Taron Thomas in his glimpses is very good. So interesting to see if he can make a consistent run at it and really be a consistent footballer with the class that he's got. And then Adelaide, for me, is the mercurial team in a sense. I feel like this is going to be a big off season for them. I feel like next season is going to be big for them to determine whether or not they're maybe not the real deal, but they're going to grow or not. You've seen the likes of Darcy Fogarty finding form, and he could be a very solid player for them because he's big, he's strong, and he can kick goals. So you don't really want a lot more. You don't really need a lot more from your key forward. So I feel like that we're going to learn a lot about Adelaide, especially in the next 12 months. If next season, if they can get a game style together, suiting their young players, suiting the future, and really knocking off some good teams, then we'll be able to make a real opinion on them. But if I were to answer the question, I would say that West Coast have the brightest future, but the Giants will make the biggest jump next season. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a fair call. I think that same with Adelaide is it the list that will take them forward? Did they make the right investments? I guess since they fell off a couple of years ago. So yeah, I agree. Big off season, and yeah, it'll be interesting because we could look back at this in a year and could be 4 new teams on this list. So be interesting to see where these 4 teams go.
It is very interesting, and we can't wait to see it. Now let's move on to the rest moment of the round, and there was 2 moments. Can't really separate them. There's been multiple moments in the last couple of weeks. I feel like all of them are deserved mentions. Let's go with Ben Cunnington. I feel like let's do that from the top. Ben Cunnington returning to footy, played in the VFL over the weekend, coming back from a cancer scare. Yeah, beautiful story. I mean, we had it with, I'm not saying we had it, but there was a Carlton player, of course, Sam Doherty, had a similar experience. He came back, and we all know how good that felt as Carlton supporters, seeing him just play footy again, let alone reach the heights that he has. Cunnington, hopefully, he can come back, maybe play a couple of games in the back end of this season, and which is the side of him being healthy, playing footy, smiling, doing what he loves. Yeah, it's more than footy. We say this every time something like this happens, but it's true. It's more than footy. It's good to see him with a smile on his face, doing what he loves, and hopefully he can build from this into the preseason and have a cracking season next year, because North could use him because he's a very, very talented player.
He was laying some hard tackles in that VFL game as well. Ruthless to those reserves players for Sydney. So it was good. It was great to watch someone who's had it hard find his way back in football again and get some game time. It's great to see. And yeah, I'm sure he'll thrive in the preseason and come back stronger than ever.
He is the model professional, and another player that has had a very professional career and has really hit the heights that we all thought he would is Josh Kennedy. His final game over the weekend, kicked eight goals, and we're not going to ask the question who won the trade between Carlton and West Coast because that's been done to death. But both got good deals, put it that way. We can be very mutual and civil about this. But Josh Kennedy, one of the all-time forwards, especially of our era, kicking goals for fun, kicking 8 on his final game. Didn't look like missing it up until the last quarter where he sprayed one left. But good to see, the champions of the game being represented in the way that they deserve. So it was good to see him kicking some snags on the way out.
It's probably one of the best endings you could have to your career. Couldn't think of a better way for a forward to end their career than kicking 8 and nearly. He didn't nearly outscore the opposition, but gave it a good go.
It would have been great if he'd kicked 10 after the siren. What could have been? I guess we'll just have to wait, or we'll just have to ponder what could have been. But I think that is enough for this episode, Nathan. Thank you very much for watching another episode of The Rest. Make sure you subscribe to the Blue Broad YouTube channel. Make sure you like the video. Thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys next time, and goodbye.